Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you all for joining. Just to be clear on where you are today, this session is overcoming the obstacles, including all students. So this session was structured as really a practical guidance session, particularly for regional institutions. And so just in case you just entered, please put your name, institution, and at least one obstacle you're facing in the chat. Our conversation will be led by Elaine Maimon, who recently completed 13 years of transformative leadership as president of Governor State University in Illinois. She is a founder of Writing Across the Curriculum and the author of many books, including an important work for our topic today, Leading Academic Change. And we're going to link that in the chat as well. Currently, Elaine is an advisor to both the American Council on Education and to the CLDE Coalition. She's also led 3 public universities for over 24 years as CEO of Service under various titles. So Elaine, thank you for joining us today, sharing your expertise. We've already started talking about some of the barriers that people are facing, but one thing in particular is the oh, another thing we've got to do. There's some comments about declining funding, especially after COVID-19. There's also some comments about the legislative context and how that's a challenge as well. So Elaine, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me just say that I am absolutely committed to interactive learning. I really believe that if high impact practices work as we know they do, they need to work at conferences also. So I'm going to do everything I can, even with Zoom and not an in-person setting, to encourage you to comment and make this very much interactive. So the first topic we were looking at when we talk about civic learning on a campus, and I know on one campus at least, and maybe at many others, the civic learning initiative has a new start because of a general education review. And a general education review takes place on many campuses. We know that civic learning has to go beyond general education, but general education is a good start. And one of the things we said before the recording went on is that whenever a campus, and especially now with people exhausted from COVID, exhausted from the mental health problems that have been really made more difficult since COVID and so forth, the idea of something else, people want to just say, leave me alone, and don't ask me to do one more thing. And so what we were saying is that's part of what I call an old math, where everything has to be addition and subtraction, and people are afraid of the subtraction and of the addition. And so one of the major things to do when it's important for people to do some rethinking is to help them to see that you're not talking about addition and subtraction. That really, and I think in terms of various deep changes that I've had the privilege of organizing on campuses, one of the most important points, quite frankly, is to say, this is going to make your life easier. Not at first, because anything new is going to require some additional energy, but it will be something that will be more satisfying, more fulfilling. It will enhance the student experience. And I think that nearly everybody on a campus wants those things. And and I think that the more that we can appeal to that kind of motivation, the better. So let me stop there. And on the question of campus exhaustion, don't ask me to think about one more thing. What are your comments and for a further discussion about that?
I love what you said about don't be afraid of the math, the additions and the subtractions, because sometimes when you roll out changes or enhancements to your curriculum, both curricular and co-curricular, people tend to, be afraid from the onset because it's something different they have to learn. So I appreciate how you framed that with not being afraid of the math.
And really changing the math. That it's not addition and subtraction. It's a rethinking. It's a calculus. It's something that will ultimately be more satisfying and make and help achieve your goals. So I think that's one kind of larger conceptual way to approach things. Now, does anybody have some practical questions on how to achieve that kind of change, let's say in general education planning sessions and so forth?
Sure. I'd love to hear more about that. I mean, for me, the question is, in addition to the exhaustion and the not doing more things, it's, we have a statewide framework based on AAC and U that we don't want to, that took 5 years to implement. So, and now we're talking about soft skills, and now we're talking about civic literacy. Like, it's just, we're just layering on and on. So I'd love more specifics around that. Thanks.
Well, I think that within the AAC and U guidelines and of high impact practices, and within the soft skills and so forth, is a natural manifestation in civic engagement. I think that basically it provides specific things to do. I mean, for example, years ago, University of Texas, Austin included in their English composition program the Constitution of the United States and the Supreme Court decisions that interpreted it. This was in the 80s. It was unbelievably political, and I don't think you can do it in Idaho. We'll talk about the politics in a minute. But it was a way to bring civic engagement into composition. And one of the major points of English composition and writing across the curriculum, as we know, is for students to find a voice, particularly now that ChatGPT is everywhere and everybody's worried about it, that instead of spending untold energy on new plagiarism policies, although you should include that you can't use ChatGPT without citing it, but that's all you really need to do on the plagiarism issue. But it provides an opportunity to do things that the students will then be able to find a voice in the democracy, and it'll also defy ChatGPT. So the whole idea is that's just an example, to find ways that the civic engagement agenda is going to help people achieve their goals. Now, for any of us who have done workshops and have gathered faculty and staff together to make deep change, there's certain very practical things to do. And let me just mention some of those and just get your responses to that. That is that it's always better to ask people for advice than to tell them what to do. And the more that you can frame the whole civic engagement discussion in, what do you think? How would this work? How would this work in your course? How would this work in your major? The better. Secondly, it's also very important to really take advantage of the fact with faculty that most faculty see themselves as researchers. And it's one of the reasons most people got into the profession because a dual kind of commitment. They really believe in student growth and improvement, and they also are researchers. If there's a way that before you make any changes in the curriculum or look for what changes you want, if you set up your committee to spend a few weeks just reading everything available on civic engagement and talking about it, thinking about it, responding to it, really making it their own. When we did a whole new first 2-year, 4-year connected program at Governor State University, the person who was in charge of the committee was not a liberal arts professor. She was a physical therapist, but she was a researcher. And one of the most important things that happened was that she wouldn't let anybody on the committee come up with ideas for general education until everybody spent about a month reading everything. And she then that was a basis for developing how to move forward. The next thing is really a very social kind of thing. I think now that we have Zoom, we should use it when for convenience when we can, but we also have to have strategic times that people are face to face and breaking bread together. There's something about the atavistic rules of hospitality in human life that mean that people behave better, when they are in a setting where there is a hospitable kind of framework. This is something I learned as a powerless assistant professor, 25 years old, trying to bring about writing across the curriculum. And it's something that works, and it's something that really does bring people together and so forth. So those are some practical ideas on how to work with faculty on the campus. So questions, comments on any of that?
Elaine, I'm going to pose a question. How do you engage students in this process? Because their feedback is important as well. So that's part one of my question. And part two is overcoming the legacy of previous curriculum. So we know students talk to each other a lot. And so if there's a new piece of the curriculum that a previous student hasn't experienced, how do you help the new students recognize what those new changes are and really embrace those changes?
Well, I think there are certain points when student leaders can be included in some of the sessions where faculty and staff are working out some of these points. That's one thing. I think also making use and really giving responsibility and credence to areas of student activity on campus that already exist. I mean, there'll be students who are already doing community service, there'll be young Democrats, young Republicans, whatever. And I think, really being strategic about bringing the students together where they've already made it a co-curricular commitment, and, to have them really part of this whole conversation, because you're absolutely right about that. In terms of students' response to change on campus and change in requirements, and gee, I didn't do this, and some of them will say, I wish I had. I do recall in the early days of writing across the curriculum when we would do these intensive summer workshops, and then in the fall, professor after professor was requiring writing in a different kind of way. And I remember one clever student, I don't know if you remember the movie called Stepford Wives, where there's this curse and, all the women in the community are kind of doing the same thing in lockstep. And one student referred to what we were doing as Stepford Wives on campus, but they were laughing about it. And, we were able to, move forward from that. In any case, I think that again, it's a question of listening, engaging, and bringing about shared ownership. I think that's really important. Let me bring up another related topic. Oh, I see a hand up. Amy.
I was just going to add that on our campus, so I work in our community engagement office. I support community-based learning courses across all 4 colleges at our university. But in terms of like that, how do you get the word out to students that things are changing? I've had good success partnering with our advisors, and it takes a lot of like proactive work to go out and try to meet with advisors and let them know. But I mean, they have the ears of students in ways that I don't. So I guess finding who those people are, and getting the word out there has been another way that's been helpful for me. So yeah.
Well, I think that's a great point. And I think empowering advisors is extremely significant. I mean, and not just in this kind of endeavor. I think that right now, I think that we have to recognize that student advising has entered a whole new phase. I think most campuses are finding that they are in great need of more counselors and advisors. I mean, the mental health issue is rampant. And I know that faculty are saying that that they are sitting there in their offices trying to help students in ways that they wish they knew how to help them better. And so I think that we have to, and I think some campuses are hiring more advisors, and we have to be supportive of that. I know that on some campuses, when you see hiring that is, quote, non-faculty, there can be, some pushback. But I think you have to look very carefully at what this non-faculty hiring is. And then I think advisors have to be made to feel the whole snobism on campuses where, if you're not a faculty member and so forth, then you're just in a different level of the hierarchy. I think that's very unfortunate. I think it basically defies democratic principles just by our own structures. And I think we have to find ways, to have a greater sense of belonging for everyone on campus, because in effect, everyone on campus is a teacher, whether the person is mowing the lawn or the person is the provost of the university. The students are interacting, the students are learning. I just need to get a little information. Kristina, how many people are on this? Can we tell? I just see a few pictures. Do we have a lot of people who are, or do we have more people who are on it whose pictures we don't see?
No, this is it. We have 7 total.
Okay, all right. Fit but few. Okay, so that's great. Okay, anything more on this idea and we can really go into depth on these matters because we don't have a large number. So, just anything more on this point.
I don't see any hands raised, so I think we're good to move.
Here's Steve.
Oh, Steve, do you have your hand raised? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been looking around on my screen for the hand raise icon, and it wasn't there. So I tried one thing and that didn't work. And then finally I thought, well, I'll just do this. There aren't that many of us. I wanted to elaborate a little bit on what Elaine said earlier about, imagining that you want your institution to move in these directions somewhere or another. What do you do? What should you watch out for? I think one important thing is to try to understand what your institution's assets already are for doing this. It might have to do with the nature of the faculty reward systems and whether it's pitched toward learning or just towards teaching load. One of the institutions that I studied for my book, these were among 6 institutions that were all improving quality of learning, equitable access and affordability at the same time, as Elaine knows, because Governor State, where she was president, was one of the 6. One of the other institutions has a really odd kind of advantage for doing this, and that's the University of Central Oklahoma. What they started with 15, 20 years ago was the idea that the goal of a University of Central Oklahoma education ought to be transformative learning for students, that they transform the way they understand things, the way they can do things, even who they are in some ways during a college education. And because they weren't content to just say, oh, that's a good slogan to sling around, it was more, all right, what does that mean? Other conversations have been identifying what most institutions would think about as general ed outcomes or other kinds of distinctive ways of looking at the teaching and learning. They came up with 5. So then with the aid of a Title III grant, they started thinking about, oh, how do we measure this? If we're saying that it's so important for students, for example, to get better and better at undergraduate research or understanding people in other cultures, what constitutes evidence, and what kinds of judgments should be made to validate it? And the move that they made at that point is the one that I really would point to, not because everybody can do it, but because if you can move in this direction, I think there's some real advantages. And that was to try to treat all kinds of learning by students on an equal basis, as opposed to totally privileging learning that occurs in courses and making little or no attempt to record or analyze learning that doesn't come from courses. But because they were looking at goals that were very action-oriented in a way, they thought, well, whatever the system is, it should be as able to trace the sources of transformation and one of these tenets, as they call them, from courses as from co-curricular activities like the summer project, or even for extracurricular activities, young Republicans, whatever. So by creating what they call a student transformative learning record, they've begun the process of that integration. And I'll just shut up after this. One of the things that I find most fascinating is it's all voluntary, but the use has been expanding and expanding because in some very basic ways it makes sense. Not least that the framing of the tenets and presenting of the evidence allows students, employers, graduate schools, parents to say, oh, that's what this education is about. That's what you're striving for, because now I can see these examples. They're documented in that learning record, and they find the language of these tenets and levels of achievement to be something pretty easy to understand. So rather than mystifying what education is about and what role civic engagement plays in it and so on, they really have tried to integrate all that and make it as clear as possible to everybody what this kind of development looks like and how far along in some crude ways that each student is towards transformative change.
No, that's good. That's good. I'm just looking at Amy's comment. Yeah, I think that the one very important feature is the fact that so many students at regional publics work. And, I see that at University of Wisconsin Parkside, students are working 20 plus hours per week. And we have to really take that into account. And as much as we can, involve their work experience into our studies, to ask students to reflect. If, let's say they're working at McDonald's, or, they're working at Amazon or whatever, there are civic issues that are there in their whole work environment. And the more that we can get them to understand and reflect and not make really dramatic dichotomies between their work and their learning, but instead, to connect the work experience and the learning experience, I think that's essential. And another thing that I think is important, and it's interesting. My oldest granddaughter, is a high school senior this year, and so she was looking for colleges. And this is a student who basically doesn't listen to anybody, even though her father and mother were there to help her. But on her own, she found, and she was just admitted to this school as her first choice school, a place that fully integrated liberal arts, and that's something she's interested in, with internships. It's Wheaton in Massachusetts. So 2 Wheatons. It's not the one in Illinois, it's the one in Massachusetts. They got a grant so that every students are just required to do internships through every semester of their 4 years. And the internships are all paid. And many of the internships are at social service, public service agencies that can't pay. But the institution was able to get a grant so that the students would be paid $4,000 a semester to work at wherever they chose. And this is so impressive to me. That here is an institution, and this is the way, by the way, to save the liberal arts. And if we incorporate civic learning in the liberal arts, this is a way to do that. We have to take into account that students work, or if they then already have jobs, and we have to connect their jobs to what they're learning. But if they are committed to working in college, the more that we can make that work meaningful through connecting it to the curriculum, connecting it to civic learning, the better. The public institution that my granddaughter found that does some of this is Ramapo, and she's a New Jersey resident. It's Ramapo in New Jersey, and that also is very impressive. So and of course, I'll just say very frankly, in terms of if she, as asking my advice, I think they're both great places. I know from experience that all of us who have worked in the public sector, especially in the regional publics represented here, are under-resourced. And that's wrong. I mean, God bless Mackenzie Scott, who is really understanding that and trying to help places like University of Wisconsin-Parkside, Ramapo be better resourced. Wheaton, Massachusetts is much better resourced. And, and they're able to give her scholarship that is basically going to make the tuition comparable to what she would pay in state in New Jersey, which is kind of amazing. But they're a private institution that knows what it's doing and will last. So, I think that's just kind of interesting. But the major point of this discussion is that we have to, at the regional publics, we have to it has to be absolutely upfront and in our minds that our students are working. And we have to find ways to access have them access the experience they're gaining, connect it with their studies, and connect it with civic learning. Comments, questions on that? I know budgets, and of course this leads us right to the budget. And I think obstacles in the chat, that was one of the big obstacles, the fact that we are so under-resourced in the regional publics. And so what do we do about that? Well, I think that we fight as hard as we can to be better resourced. And, I'm happy to see my recently former state of Illinois is a whole lot better resourced now under Governor Pritzker than it was. And then I was there when he became governor, and we started to get better resourced. And that, just makes a big difference with what you can do. If you're under-resourced, and of course, you have to be looking at grants, you have to be looking at Title III, you have to be looking at every possible way to gain more resources that will help with civic engagement. But also, I think it's a question of, again, it's a different kind of math. It's not adding and subtracting. It's basically rethinking, reallocating, understanding that if you really do engage students civically and so forth, that basically you're going to help enrollment. And then one other thing, and this was something that happened most dramatically when I was the head of the West Campus of Arizona State University. And then I carried it through to Alaska-Anchorage and to Governor State. We made sure that we did major voter registration and voting drives, as I think most of you do. We had buttons that said ASU West votes, UAA votes, GSU votes. And that was for a number of purposes. One was, of course, to get students in the habit of voting and seeing it as the essential voice in the society, educational, but it also had some political ramifications. Legislators noticed how strong a voting bloc the institution could be. That was most dramatic at Arizona State University West, where a very authoritarian, reactionary legislator represented the district that we were in. And we actually voted her out. We got her out, because of a voting bloc and it wasn't partisan. It was basically, we had debates on campus that were televised to everyone in the area, and it was all about who supports higher education. And we were able to, galvanize a vote, to get a much more responsive legislator in office who was going to help the campus with resources. So in terms of the budget issues, it's a question of doing everything you can to increase the budget, but also making wise and effective use of the budget that you have. And then politically, making sure that legislators know that your campus is a voting bloc and that it's important for them to support, higher education goals. Now that may work Arizona is an interesting state. I'm sitting in Arizona now because we just developed such important ties, even though our home is in Philadelphia now for 10 months, but 2 months here. But Arizona is a very interesting state because you have, I'm just going to be frank, you have the crazies, but then you also have a majority, it's the reason it's a purple state. You have a majority of people in Arizona who are really committed to higher education, who are sensible people, who want things to work well, and so we can do that. I want to hear a little bit more about. I am just horrified by what I'm reading about Idaho, and I don't know, Heidi, do you want to give us a sense of what you're facing and if there's anything we can do to be helpful?
It's as horrifying as what you read. I think some of the, I wanted to go back to what you said earlier, Elaine. I think one thing that can happen, especially on the faculty level, is that by asking ourselves, what can we do that's productive and supports student learning, but within the constraints we have, instead of we always forever assign 5 essays and we give 1 page of feedback on each essay. The budget crisis has helped people, has kind of forced people to rethink what they do, for better, for worse. So being unsettled, also, again, with the addition of Chat GPT and other AI like that, those can actually make us, it does not automatically mean our pedagogy is worse, which I think is exciting. It's good. Maybe we do fewer things. Maybe we do a lot more reflection. Maybe we think a lot more about students doing the work and us having less responsibility that we've kind of taken on, I think. So I think in some ways disruption can be good. That's what I wanted to say to that end, and sometimes faculty kind of need to be forced by forced isn't the right word, but prodded by external circumstances. As far as Idaho itself, honestly, our biggest concern across the state right now, of course, is our school that is on the brink of serious accreditation challenges. So I know I have close colleagues up there, know people at North Idaho College. I'm now at the State Board of Ed, there's not much we can do policy wise, except watch and be on the ready and ready to help when things happen. So that's hard. And then, we have an openly hostile legislation who it would not be wise for us to remind them that students are a voting bloc.
That's right. That would not be, it's horrifying. It's not just Idaho, of course, Florida. And I have to just keep reminding myself, despair is not a strategy.
Right.
But I've never in my whole career seen anything like this.
Right.
I just, I just keep racking my brain for ways that we can work together. I know that ACE, where I work as an advisor, has been thinking very hard about this and about what we can do collectively. And of course, there are the courts, but the courts take a while.
Mhm.
And I read one article in either the Chronicle or in Inside Higher Ed that basically said that if we start, that arguments about academic freedom are really not, are going to be counterproductive with
Yeah.
a lot of these legislators, that we have to be making the argument about the strength of the universities. And that undermining the strength of the universities in research and in things that they care about. And it was my experience in Arizona, which is this different sort of state, but has its elements, that the more that I could focus on our shared commitment to the university as an economic driver,
Mhm.
the more success I had in anything
Yeah.
that I was talking with legislators about. And so in the short run, I think the opprobrium that is just descending on Florida and Idaho and other states that are doing these draconian things is something that there might be a way to get people to be quiet or be back off a little bit, basically not do what they're doing. I mean, and so that was kind of the better idea that I had. And I do, and before we go on to this larger conceptual issue of how did we get here, when when many of the people who are creating universities as the enemies, as the snobs, as the people who are looking down on the electorate, and who really need to be stopped. And we have a governor in Florida who, what did he do? Go to Yale. He went to, very privileged kind of Ivy League background, and yet he's leading the march in this way. How did this happen? How did we, in terms of civic learning and civic engagement, how did this democracy get in this pickle? And I've just been racking my brain, to try to think about it so that there could be a remedy. But I want to look at Steve's question about better resourced regionals. Quite frankly, the better resources for regional institutions, it has to do a lot with allocation of state budgets, not necessarily higher taxes. In the cases where it might involve higher taxes, it's not going to affect the low-income people. It's going to be the kind of communal commitment that people make to having bridges that don't fall down, and at least we got an infrastructure bill for that, and having an educational system that people can believe in because they think it's going to make us a better country and make everybody's lives better. And so I have no sympathy for any argument against better resources for the regionals. And that's why I think Mackenzie Scott is doing such a great service by, giving enormous contributions to a number of regionals, historically Black institutions, and so forth, to really set the frame. Because in higher education philanthropy, another problem is the rich get richer. And, the regionals that are doing so much of the hard work that really need the resources are not getting what they should get. Okay, and you're asking me about at GSU, worked hard at reallocating funds to high priorities. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It got across the legislature. One in particular, and I want us to talk about this too, maybe before we get into the larger discussion of the whole doomsday rhetoric. We don't want to be too negative here. But one thing that the legislature in Illinois really responded to was our resource investment in community college university partnership. And they really applauded that. And they understood the importance of it. And they understood how that was going to reach students. And I would always say to the legislature, our biggest competitor is not Illinois State. Our biggest competitor is not an out-of-state university. Our biggest competitor is nowhere. It's the students who are going nowhere, who are qualified, but are going nowhere. And many of those students could start at the community college so long as they had a clear four-year pathway. We developed a program that Kresge has highlighted, the Kresge Foundation has highlighted as a really important program. And this was at the same time we were offering what I think was one of the best four-year interconnected programs for students who started as freshmen. But we gave really equal attention to the community college pathway, and we partnered with 17 Chicago area community colleges. And that was one clear example where the legislature was willing to give us more money because we were doing something that they respected. We weren't trying to compete with other institutions. We were trying to put the student at the center and move forward. So I think that's really a key element in connecting. Does anyone want to talk about community college university partnership?
I mean, sure. We just passed in our state. We have Idaho's also kind of unique in that we're small. So we're 4 years and 4 community colleges. That's it. That's our system. And we're not even a system, but we work together. Anyway, we have an MOU now for joint and co-enrollment so that students can be in 2 places, attend 2 institutions at once, have their academic records shared at least at the end of every semester. It's not totally integrated, but it's open, kind of required sharing at that level. But I think it's figuring out how to accelerate that. Again, it's always the challenge of all the competing initiatives, and how to help institutions focus on that particular kind of effort. So,
yeah, I think that that's one of the initiatives in terms of civic responsibility. If we really want to connect with the new majority, as I call it, of low-income students of color, adults, and military veterans, the only way to do it is through community college partnership. And that means getting over the snobbery. I mean, we talked about the snobbery of faculty against non-faculty. The snobbery of university faculty against community college faculty it just gets in our way. And we have to find ways to bring the faculty together, to build trust, to build relationships. And that's really the key to make these partnerships happen. I call it the Maimon hierarchical fallacy, that if I teach at the university and you teach at the community college, I must be smarter than you. And I think that gets in our way so much in terms of the sort of reforms that we want to bring about in higher education.
So can I share one piece of good news along that line?
Yep.
So on the eastern side of Idaho, we have the Idaho National Laboratory, and it's an area of Idaho that is fairly rural, and there's not a lot of other large development. Anyway, there is now a joint degree that is set up as a 4-year degree with the community college, College of Eastern Idaho, and then Boise State, fully online in cybersecurity, and students can actually start in high school with concurrent enrollment and then go all the way through without leaving their home or leaving their area. Because part of the other challenge that we face in Idaho is this perception that you have to give up something of your own identity, or you have to move to an urban area in order to go to college. So I do think there's lots of potential in that area that's actually really exciting.
Yeah, and I really see that as part of the whole civic learning agenda that we have here, because, you know, just to double back on the problem we're having in Idaho, Florida, and so forth, if we can find ways so that the disenfranchised students in rural areas who have been, you know, basically galvanized into anti-intellectual, anti-science, anti-evidence people, you know, which is going to destroy democracy if we don't do something about it. And what you've just described, you know, with students who don't want to go into the city, but, you know, who want to have an education, and then help starting in high school where they have to be, and then, you know, getting them into you know, that kind of a learning curve is so important. So I think that's one remedy, and I think we really have to be focusing on it. You know, I think that the discussion that preceded this breakout group, it was right about democracy, and we don't want to romanticize it, and there's certainly a lot of problems involved in it, and disenfranchised groups, but we also have to remember that the enemies out there are real, and that even though democracy is flawed, it is something that provides hope for a better future. And, you know, I just listened to some of that, and I thought, you know, we have to be really aware of what's out there. And those of you, and if you're in a state like Idaho, others who are in the states where this is happening, I mean, this is even worse than what I've read about the Joe McCarthy period in the 50s, because it's more institutionalized. It was very personalized during the McCarthy period. This is anti-institution, and, you know, I think that you talk about a crucible moment. I mean, we're really at a moment where we have to urgently address these issues. And just one more point that we didn't get to that, you know, I think it's very important to look at, and that's social media. And the fact that we have to incorporate in, I believe, in any kind of civic learning initiative, media literacy broadly, you know, helping students, you know, because we suddenly we live in an age where information has never been more readily available. It's a torrent of information. A great deal of it is lies, falsehoods, conspiracies, fantasies, and from preschool to grad school, we have to incorporate ways for students to make sense of it. And as far as I'm concerned, that should be at the forefront of our curriculum in civic engagement. That I see the media literacy part. By the way, I wrote an article about media literacy that I write for what's called the Philadelphia Citizen. So if you just want to Google that, you'll see my media literacy article. But I have one coming out tomorrow on ChatGPT, and how, you know, we should be using that responsibly in the classroom. So with that, let me see, we're almost at the witching hour. What do we have, 3 more minutes, Kristina? Any final words or thoughts?
Well, thank you for leading that great discussion. It's definitely given me a lot of thought to some challenges and some strategies to help overcome those challenges. So I really want to thank you for your time and expertise. There is another plenary after this that starts at 4:15. It's going to be led by Jackie Pfeiffer Merrill. So I encourage you all to attend that next session at 4:15. So you'll have about 15 minutes to take a break, get a stretch, whatever you need to do to come back fully energized for that next session.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kristina. Thank you, everybody. And see you soon.